Well,
ready to go? I'll press the button.
Yeah, go.
Need to get my pen.
Okay, we are live.
Okay.
Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the final meeting this civic year of the Norwich City Council Scrutiny Committee. We're conducting this meeting under the coronavirus power, so we're having it virtually. It's being streamed on the Council's YouTube channel, and any decisions or recommendations that we make today have the same validity as if the meeting were happening at City Hall. I'd like to welcome anyone who is watching and those members of the committee. Go through our agenda. Item 1, any declarations of interest for any members for items on the agenda today? No declarations of interest. Apologies. I've had apologies from councillors Giles, Manning, Carlo, and councillor Sue Sands, and councillor Mike Sands is replacement for councillor Sue Sands. I think that's everything there. No public questions or petitions. Item 4 is minutes. Are members happy that the minutes are an accurate record of the previous meeting and that they can be signed? All those in favour, please indicate. Yeah, great, the minutes are approved. Thank you. Item 5, the Norfolk Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I'd like to thank Councillor McCartney-Gray for her written report and also for attending the most recent meeting of NHOSC this morning. So Councillor McCartney-Gray, if you could give us an overview of your meeting this morning, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this morning, Scrutiny Committee, NHOSC looked at 2 items. The first one was the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. The main issue there was that they have received a verbal update yesterday from a CQC visit, and it's showing significant improvements. So we will receive written confirmation of that at some point over the next month or so. We had a number of recommendations based on some issues they have around their actual building, which is, by the sounds of it, falling down. And the recommendation was to write to MPs, Secretary of State for Health and Social Care regarding the state of the building, to recommend that they are recommended for a new build or a partial new build in the November 21 release of funding for hospital builds. They weren't included in the last one, although they were in significant disrepair than some of the other places that did receive funding for new builds. The other recommendation was to write to Norfolk and Suffolk Foundation Trust to liaise with the QEH re-access to services to support staff. I will send in a fuller written report at later date. The part 2 was workforce update from the Norfolk and Waveney Health and Care Partnership and Norfolk and Waveney Clinical Commissioning Group. And they were talking about workforce and improvements to recruitment, and it included a £2 million investment from national government to Norfolk County Council, which is being used for recruitment and retention at both in the NHS and social care. It includes a sort of educational achievement so that people can work their way up the scale. The recommendations that came out of that was to write to local MPs regarding retired staff on higher salaries and pension deficits they would face if they are returning, to the hoops that you have to go through when returning, including mandatory training for returners, even on a temporary basis. There is, if you've worked in the NHS, there's a whole raft of mandatory training that you have to do every year. And when my updates would come through, you've got to do this, there would be a great big sigh from my corner of my office. Issues of low paid staff on 0 hours contracts, that was for social care. And someone recommended that we write to Norfolk County Council itself and work with children's services to promote working in the health and social care sector, so that they build up a idea of the sorts of roles that they could go into when they're looking to go to work from leaving education. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that report, Councillor McCartney-Gray. Do any councillors have any questions for Councillor McCartney-Gray on the NHOS committee? Councillor Graham and then Councillor Somesi. Thank you. Councillor Graham.
Yeah, referring to your written, in your report of the previous meeting, the Prison Health Service was discussed, and I wanted to ask where we were on compatibility of records, because if somebody comes into your care, you need to know what's been happening to them before you came into your care. And with revolving doors, people are going to be in new places dealing with new health professionals. So I wondered if the record keeping was compatible with their NHS records when they're outside before and after prison.
No.
Oh dear.
It is, it's a short answer. The longer answer is that yes, we've asked for further information. We've asked for information on how they're going to improve that connectivity and getting systems to talk to each other, and allowing GDPR regulations to perhaps not be relaxed in this case, but actually work in favour of having continuity of service across the various parts of the NHS. You probably know already, but even in primary care and secondary care, so that doesn't work either at the moment. But I think it's really important for prison health, especially when someone is leaving prison, if they have any physical or mental health problems, that the GP practice that they register with in primary care is aware of that, and that they also have access to secondary care records if they've been treated in secondary care.
Thank you. I'm glad someone's on the case.
Thank you. Councillor Somesi.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks ever so much, Councillor McCartney-Gray, for your report. Really thorough on the microsuction ear irrigation clearance service. These are not glamorous. It's not a glamorous service. I can say that because I go up there myself every 6 months. One of the points that you make in the report is, or that one of the points that's been made in there, they've told you, is that they're going to monitor it, and they're going to do a deep dive evaluation due to be undertaken shortly. And I hope that we'll be keeping this on the agenda and that we'll hear something back about that deep dive evaluation.
Yes, I would hope so as well. I have to say I was a little bit disappointed with the responses to both yours and mine's questions, Councillor Somesi, but it is what it is, and I will ask Maureen Orr to ask for a written update. They say that they are aware there are issues. I believe they're aware that there are issues because there have been a number of concerns and complaints about people perhaps falling through the net, not knowing about the new service and how to access them, especially during COVID-19. And because this is something that affects my family personally as well, that this would be kept on NHOS agenda going forward.
Great. Thank you very much, Councillor McCartney-Gray, and thank you to other councillors for your questions. So we'll now move on to item 6, which is the CCSP-SSP, the Community Safety Partnership sub-panel report. Councillor Giles has presented a written report, but he's not here today to take any questions. So if we can just agree to note that report, please. Yeah, agreement there. Thank you. Then move on to item 7. Which is,
Chair.
oh, sorry.
Chair, I do apologise for interjecting. There was something that I wanted to ask, and I wondered if it could be noted and Councillor Giles could be asked. Is that a possibility?
Absolutely, yes. Please fire away.
Okay. Thank you very much. Great report. Lots of detail. Very pleased to see that all these initiatives are happening, particularly this one called New Roads. I'll follow that up separately with Councillor Giles, perhaps, and other people, because I do work with children who are care leavers sometimes and in care. But the thing I was wondering about was under the prevent strategy on page 23, we get a statistical breakdown in percentages. But what we don't know is the actual number of individuals who were referred in that period and in the previous period. So if we find out, for example, that whereas the majority of referrals or a large percentage of referrals before COVID were from the education services, schools, no surprise there really, and then that becomes different under COVID, and we assume it says here this reflects home learning throughout the COVID. We don't know if that's the only reason, but we might surmise that, obviously. But we don't know exactly how many were referred. And I think that would be quite nice for us to know the number, not just the percentages, if it's okay to note that, please.
Yes, thank you very much for that. I think that's very appropriate to note. So we'll get that noted. I've got Councillor Sands and then Councillor Graham who wish to speak on this item. Thank you. Councillor Sands.
Just to say, I might be able to supply those figures. I have briefings from CTLP. Although I can't release the actual briefing notes, I can pick some facts and figures from them. And amongst them are the figures for Prevent and the other initiatives as well. So I'll dig those out.
Thank you, Councillor Sands. Councillor Graham.
Thank you. I wondered if it might be appropriate to ask for an updated safeguarding briefing for councillors so that we know who to refer to for what concerns, really.
Yeah, no, that seems highly appropriate. I'm sure we can get that arranged for the start of the new civic year. Nods coming from Democratic Services officers. So yeah, thank you for suggesting that.
And possibly for with officers too.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to the next item, which is our work programme. Obviously, it's the end of the scrutiny year now, so we're not looking to add anything else onto the programme. I'd like to thank all the members of the committee for your engagement and sort of constructive questioning and recommendations during this civic year. And just a sort of reminder for those who will be coming back next year to get your topic forms completed so that we've got some ideas for things to put on our next work programme. And just to sort of for clarification that nothing gets carried over. So if there's something that you want to see considered by next year's committee, please get a form filled in and send it in. Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions they need to ask on the work programme? No? Okay, in which case we'll now move on to the main item of today's meeting, which is on page 37 of your papers, and is the joint procurement and contract management strategy. I'd like to welcome Tracy Woods, who's joining us at Scrutiny, who's the business relationship and procurement manager, Adam Clark, who's the strategy manager, and Annabelle Scholes, who's the 151 officer. We'll have a very brief overview of the report, and then largely it's up to us as the committee to talk through some of the things that we might want to see included when this goes to Cabinet in mid-April. And we've also got Councillor Paul Kendrick, who's the responsible Cabinet member here today as well. So welcome to you all, and over to whoever just wants to give us a very brief overview. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, I don't know if anyone else is getting this, but there's giving me a lot of feedback from when you're speaking. I think other people are as well.
Okay, thank you. I'll see if I can do something about that while I'm getting an overview.
I was just waiting to see if it was just Councillor Wright or the Zoom itself. It seems to be just Councillor Wright, so I was just waiting for the next person to speak, essentially. But I think it is just you, Councillor Chair.
Okay, thank you. Well, others can speak, and then I'll have a look at what I can do.
I think it's your Dalek voice synthesizer.
Well,
If we can-
thank
if
you,
we can
Chair. I'll,
kick off with an officer, then I'll unplug my camera and have a yeah.
okay, thank you, Chair. I'll introduce the report in front of you, but it's with big thanks to Tracy and Adam for the hard work that's gone in to get us to this stage. But fundamentally, what we're going to do tonight is to do some pre-scrutiny work. This draft document is on its way through to Cabinet. We've engaged with CLT. We've used our team meeting, which is a group of over 40 senior officers in the council, and we've worked with our leader and portfolio leads as well to talk through how we want to sort of use the strategy in the wider context of the city. So it's very much in draft though, and we're welcome and open to conversations with yourselves. But strategy is kind of outlining our direction of travel. You can see when you get to the implementation plans appendices that we are looking that this is going to be a journey of probably 2 or 3 years to get us to where we want to be. But fundamentally, we want to ensure that the strategy gives the opportunities that we want as a council, and basically brings in all of the things, whether it be the local economy, social value, sustainability. And you can see within the strategy, you know, we take you through that journey of why we want to look at those areas. So I didn't want to go through it in detail because it is a draft document and it's here for discussion, but happy obviously to take any questions.
Thank you. How's my audio now?
It's fine.
Clear.
Good. My white balance is off, but we'll worry about that in a minute. Does who would like to kick off from a councillor perspective with any questions? Councillor Osborne.
Thank you. Yes, you're looking very tanned, James. Yes, I was going to. Obviously, I think it's really. There's a lot in the sort of principles of this that are really good. I'm really pleased to see sort of the emphasis on local procurement, on sustainability, obviously, and on social value. I was wondering about the weighting that's going to be given to social value in terms of procurement. I understand that some councils have up to sort of 20% weighting for social value when they're in their procurement criteria. And do we have an indication of what our weighting is likely to be?
We haven't touched on that as part of the strategy. Fundamentally, that will be part of how we implement the strategy. Each different procurement will give consideration to each of the elements, and there'll be very clear guidance when we're going out to the market as to what percentage will be considered as part of the evaluation of the whole process. So we haven't in the strategy gone into that detail, and you might find us say that several times, but obviously any points you want to raise, we can ensure then we take that through to how we implement that, and we actually give guidance to our officers, but we won't be a perfect target within this strategy.
Can I come back on that?
Please do.
I mean, as I understand it, sort of 20% is about the highest that councils can go. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. But given that this council is committed to social value, I'd hope that would be something that we can aspire to and take forward as a sort of aspiration. So, maybe already looking ahead to recommendations, that might be one of the recommendations that this committee might look at.
Thank you for that. I just had a question on the reporting and measurement. It says in the draft that you'll be looking at the reporting and measurement implementation plan after the strategy has been approved. What does the sort of timeline of that look like, please?
So fundamentally within the the next 3 months post April's cabinet, I would hope to have a very clear implementation plan. But what we need to identify is the different types of resources that we'll need to bring in to help us with that. And we just wanted to make sure that we got the good overview of what the strategy was first before we then picked up the implementation. But within 3 months, I would hope that we'd have an implementation plan that we're very clear about what resources utilising and how long it will take us to get us on that first part of the journey, as discuss the sort of phasing of how we'll go through that implementation.
Great. Thank you very much. Councillor Ryan.
Unmuted there. Thank you, Chair. Clearly, with Norse coming back in-house, we have had considerable issues with procurement and keeping an eye on how we're spending our money and how services are being carried out. How have we got into this situation? What have been the factors that have caused this? Is it a lack of resources? Is it a lack of the right people in the right places? How have we got to this stage, Annabelle?
So what we've identified through some of the valuable work that internal audit have done is we've just got a few areas where the contract management oversight of particular contracts is maybe not where we'd like it to be. So within that, we've identified that we will be doing some more training for staff, but we've actually set up a service review that will be happening in this year to look at actually how we can get best value out of our contracts. And that will also cover off how we're currently managing our contracts. One point I would like to use to answer that, Councillor Ryan, but fundamentally there are training needs we've identified, and we do therefore need to look at that, and that may lead us on to actually consideration of whether we've got the right resources in the right places to manage some of the contracts we've got.
I'm sorry, I missed that bit. It was a problem with the sound. Can you repeat the last point you made? My apologies.
Yeah, so we've already identified that we need to do some training with staff, but as part of looking at with the training needs assessment, we will review what capacity we've got in each area for each contract, because every very different in how it's set up. So for example, now that we're moving across contracts to our wholly owned company, we won't need the infrastructure that we had in place for a third party in the same way, because it's a trusted business partner, we're a wholly owned company, and we've got different governance around how that will work. So we're hoping that the client side of that particular contract will lighten and obviously be an efficiency to the organisation, because we're using what is fundamentally an arm of our own council in a wholly owned company, and the relationship is very different. So it depends on which contract we're looking at, how we'll approach it. But as I said, the service review we're doing, we'll look at all contracts and how we manage them, and then look at whether the teams that are looking after them have got the right skills, do they need some training, and is the right capacity there. So that will be part of the review we're doing.
So you're saying it's having the right people in the right place to carry out this work and keep an eye on how we're spending our money, which got us to where we are at the moment. Is that what you're saying? Is it personnel or finance? Is it a combination of the two?
I think what we've done is identified that we've got some areas need to improve. Fundamentally, I don't want you to think this is a problem across the board, because it isn't. And internal audit haven't raised it as such a problem. Fundamentally, though, we've been very open about the fact we've got some areas we can improve on, and we will work on that. So I can't give you, it's not one easy answer in each of the different situations. So each one's dealt with in its own right. But the fundamental is, though, the procurement strategy that we're discussing tonight is to give us the opportunity of how we're reaching out to our business community to work with us to make sure the council gets best value. There is a second stage to it around how we then manage those contracts. So this document in front of us that we're discussing tonight is the first part, and it's the strategy and approach that we go out to commission our services.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Annabelle.
Thank you. Councillor Samesi, you had a question, please.
Chair, following on from what Councillor Ryan said, and you might have answered this partly actually, Annabelle, on page 48, managing the commercial life cycle, we've got these 5 boxes. I think it's a really good document, actually, by the way. So I don't know who's entirely responsible for that. I'm sure it's a group effort. I was really interested in that last one, that one that says contract and relationship management. And I think you sort of touched on it a bit. You said it depends on the contract, and you talked about the in-house, the relationship with in-house contracts, managing those. But could you say a little bit more about that? Have you got any thoughts about what differences there might be in terms of managing the relationship? Because I think it's a really interesting
you know, facet really to this whole thing. It's not just about, you know, faceless buying goods and, you know, it's not just transactional, hopefully. So just wondered if you had anything else to add to that.
No, so to give an example, depending on the value of the contract and the type of service that's being offered, you may have quarterly contract review meetings. So if I can talk about MP Law, where we work with Norfolk County Council in that partnership arrangement with the law service. Fundamentally, I as lead officer on that will meet with MP Law lead on a quarterly basis. We'll be looking at what the performance has been, what the delivery and outcomes have been, and then we'll obviously look at the financials as well as to whether we're within the financial envelope that we originally commissioned the contract on, and that happens on a quarterly basis. Other contracts though, if we have just commissioned a call-off contract that is all about equipment, whether it be paper for the office or pens and pencils, that contract will be put in place, and then it's just a matter of drawing down on those contracts with different purchase orders. So there isn't that kind of contract management side to it, but obviously Tracy will have an oversight if she gets any feedback from people saying actually they're not delivering the right goods and we have problems with invoicing, and then Tracy's team will probably get back in and help us out with looking at how that contract was set up originally and is it delivering the purpose. That depends on what the contract is, what we're trying to commission as to the support system that we put behind it. So does that help with an example?
Can I just come in there as well, Chair? Just in terms of the sort of realization of social value, the relationship, the contractor relationship is a really key thing. And we've got good examples where we have existing relationships with organisations who are supplying goods or services to the council, who then, when there are different things happening, are able to then provide added social value on top of the goods and services, which wouldn't be realised without that ongoing contract management relationship. For example, the continuation a couple of summers ago of school meals, holiday hunger programme through Norse, and that was to do with an ongoing positive relationship between the council and the contractor, which allowed us to realise additional social value on top of the core contract as well. So if those sorts of opportunities that flow from that ongoing contract management relationship.
Thank you. Councillor Osborne and then Councillor McCartney-Gray, please.
Yeah, thank you. Adam's just sort of partly answered that question. My question, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the sort of issues around delivery is more of an issue for audit, and you know, the sort of quality of delivery is more of an issue for audit, and around the social value is more of an issue for scrutiny. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but so I do want to focus a bit on the sort of social value aspect of the contract management, and that's about, you know, my question is about what support have we got in place for the contractors who maybe smaller contractors who may struggle to meet some of the standards that we would expect sort of at the immediate level of when we're tendering those contracts. So, you know, if we want to be aiming for carbon neutrality, very few companies are going to be able to offer that from 2021. So are we going to be able to offer support to companies or contractors to continue to meet those social value and particularly sustainability objectives, and what's the sort of reporting on that, and councillor involvement as well?
So we're expecting, as part of the implementation plan, is to start working with some of our local business community. We're seeing that as a next step. I think if we'd had more time, we would have ideally liked to have done it at this stage, but because we wanted to be refreshing this strategy as we evolve and we go on our journey, we felt that actually we could go at this stage with that and then do the consultation with businesses afterwards. Now, the reason I'm highlighting that is because we want to understand what the barriers are to our local businesses of actually working with us and actually contracting with us, and kind of demystifying some of it. So in relation to that, Jamie, what we don't want is people coming or not coming to work with us because they feel that they've already kind of can't tick that box. And it's about working with them so they can understand where our vision and strategy is. And if they can articulate with us how they can come on that journey, then we can work with them. It's all about what we will be doing is we put a value on that to us. So we will be actually understanding that if people are on that journey, there is a cost associated with that. And we need to be able to support that. So what we want to do is to do a workshop, talk to our local businesses about why maybe they're not coming to us and tendering for work, and actually what are the journey they need to go on. It's exactly the same with trying to get to the real living wage. It may be that they as an employer currently don't pay the real living wage, but that shouldn't stop them working with us. It's about having those conversations and helping them understand that actually we pay the value of the real living wage, but there would be an expectation that they would be able to take their workforce on that journey with us, and therefore they can then in future to tick that. Obviously, if we awarded the contract, there would be that expectation that that would be in place immediately. So we do want to do some work with the local community about that, Councillor Osborne, and see where we can take that. I probably don't have all the answers as to how that will work at the moment. I'm pretty sure we'll be interested in ensuring it's a wider group to be able to do that.
I
don't know, Adam, if you want to add anything to that, because that was part of the conversation we had, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, just specifically on social enterprises, I suppose, and there is a piece of work around social enterprises within the Good Economy Commission, part of which is considering how the city itself, not just the council, but the sort of ecosystem of the city can become a more positive enabling space for social enterprises to thrive. And part of that is about how they access procurement. But it's also about helping other businesses to understand how in their supply chain social enterprises might represent value to them. And that could obviously include environmental outcomes as well. But the gap in that is, it has been identified that, again, it's that proportionality that the smaller the business or the social enterprise is, the less able it is to necessarily undertake all of the measurement and the impact and the sort of showing that added value, both as being part of supply chain of other organisations, but also for its own supply chain. So you get that sort of virtual circle. So I think within that good economy social enterprise aspect, there are opportunities to explore what those needs are of those businesses, and therefore how we can effectively plug those as part of that wider ecosystem, not just as us as a procurer, but as a key body in the city.
Councillor Osborne, do you have a follow-up to that?
Yeah, muted. Yes, please. Thank you. That's yes, that's very, very good to hear. And it's sort of taking from what you're saying that we're expecting to have a sort of a set of minimum standards that we're expecting from suppliers or from contractors that they may not necessarily immediately meet, but that we would be aiming for them to hopefully meet as they work with us. And I'm wondering if we can see, what are the sort of standards that we're expecting from our contractors. Obviously, you may not have those details at the moment, but when and where can we see those? Will it include things like carbon reduction, obviously, potentially company pay ratios, use of single-use plastics, for example, use of repairable and avoidance of landfill goods, and things like that. And I'm wondering if we can see those standards. And then the other question I have is how will we be measuring the social value? Because I understand, I don't know if officers have looked into the TOMS national framework. And again, Councillor Kendrick might have views on this, because I did send some of these points in an email back in February, I think. So I think you may have some of that detail, but I don't know if you've looked into that and whether that's an option. And then my third question is about councillor involvement. Because obviously this is all quite high level, and would hopefully be able to see more of this detail as it comes forward, and what is going to be the process for councillor involvement going forward, especially as as representatives of ward councillors, we may be in touch with some of the sort of opportunities for social value in our wards and in the city that can be linked in with what the council's trying to achieve. So it's really 3 questions, I suppose, is what will be the standards that we're using, where can we see them, how will we be measuring it, and councillor involvement.
Sorry, Adam, did you want to go first?
No, I'll come in on the social value measurement side of things, but do you want to start off?
Yeah, I wasn't going to answer that one, so thank you for that, because what I was going to explain is we've been working with ILGA, who are an organisation who work in the local area, and fundamentally we've been using some of their expertise, and they've been working on national frame in relation to procurement, and they're going to help us with the next steps as well in relation to how we do look at how we measure that. But I don't believe we're going to be putting specific standards. It will be more about our ambition and how those organisations align what we're doing. But I'm going to let Adam answer, and then I'll come back on the specifics about member engagement.
Yeah, so in terms of the measurement, we have looked at, there are a few off-the-shelf measurement frameworks, and Tom's is one of them. But we were, going back to the winter before last, we were undertaking a piece of work with all the other districts and the county council to look at social value measurement frameworks, and we looked in some depth at Tom's to see whether there was a standard approach across the county which could be adopted. And it wasn't felt that there was necessarily one size that would work for all organisations, all of the local government in the county. And then COVID came along, and districts got somewhat distracted. So we've not progressed that county-wide approach, but we have continued to look at some of the models that are out there. And so one option would be to take an off-the-shelf model, and then so with something like Tom's, you've got a whole series of different outcomes, and you then need to be working out how you apply those to each of the contracts that you are awarding and monitoring. The other option would be to work backwards from your own priorities locally, rather than a sort of set of indicators that are used across the country. I think the approach that we're most likely to take is to start from the basis of some of those off-the-shelf models, and then adopt them to make sure that they mirror the corporate objectives of the council, because that's the part of the point of this strategy is to ensure that our procurement is supporting what we're trying to achieve as a council. So within that, I suspect there would be, and this is jumping the gun, but I would suspect there wouldn't be many minimum standards that we would apply. But for example, the real living wage is something that we already ask all contractors to pay. That is a minimum standard, so there is a precedent for that. It's considered to be politically and corporately significant enough that it's a minimum standard for all contractors. So the precedent is there that we could do that. But I think with the measurement piece, the challenge is going to be finding the right indicators that are measurable and reportable across the whole suite of the myriad complex different types of contracts we have. So something on the scale of Tom's, for example, would probably be beyond what we could use universally, but there might be some sampling of the larger contracts that we would use that on. So yeah, in short, I think let's use what's already out there, but we need to do a piece of work internally and with people with input from ILGA, and to mould it around the corporate priorities and the key political ambitions of the council.
Can I have one follow-up, James?
Very quickly, because I've got a long list of other councillors who've now indicated. Thank you.
Yeah, Just on that minimum standards point, just, I'm very pleased to hear that the living wage is a minimum standard, and I would also expect that carbon reduction would be a minimum standard that we would expect. It doesn't necessarily need to be zero carbon from day one, but having in place a roadmap for how they're going to do that, especially if we're, as a council, aiming to be carbon neutral by 2030, that has to be a minimum standard, as far as I'm concerned.
So I just wanted to come back, if you don't mind, Chair, in relation to kind of wider engagement going forward. Very happy to talk to you again about how we do that once we've got the strategy in place. I think it is really going to start to flow from the additional work we'll do with local businesses as to what additional support we need. And obviously I understand that each ward will have their own understanding of what's out there and how it can help. So we'll give some consideration to that. I can't say definitely there'll be a member working party or anything like that, but we'll listen and we'll give that consideration. What I want to do is to make sure that we haven't got barriers to our local businesses and we are able to engage in the best way possible. I totally agree though with where Adam's coming from. We don't want to preclude people by having minimum standards, but I do agree as well it is that direction of travel and where the contribution will be coming from to support our vision, whether it be sustainable and environmental issues or any other priority of the council. So yeah, we can pick that up, but I do want to start with the engagement with the business community about where they feel they are and how they can engage with us, and then I'm sure there'll be lots of different activities that will flow off the back of that. And if it is down to simply helping, maybe we will want to set up something that says we'll help you with your strategies and your options, and to help you understand what types of things will help us on our carbon neutral agenda. It may be that they just need some help at that level. So I'm not precluding anything at the moment until I totally understand what the needs are out there.
Thank you. Before I bring in the Councillor McCartney-Gray, who's indicated next, I just want to quickly pick up on the point in relation to sort of local businesses. And actually, the draft strategy is makes a number of references to local businesses. So obviously, we've had some questions about that already. I guess where I'm coming from is if a business feels that it perhaps doesn't meet the various criteria that we have, and we tender for some work and it goes to a much larger company, is there, as part of this strategy, will we be working with the successful bidder, if they're a larger company, to, where appropriate, subcontract with smaller businesses who are local to Norwich? And I'm just wondering how that works in practice, the sort of making sure that we are closing that loop, if at all possible, even when a smaller Norwich business is unsuccessful.
So we have had a discussion about whether we can encourage people to work together. I'm going to actually ask Tracy to come in on this point about the technicalities of the current procurement legislation and what it allows us to do and doesn't. So Tracy, do you mind?
Yeah, I mean, in fact, actually, by the time we get to a large contractor perhaps winning a contract, it's probably too late. What we need to do is actually make sure we can get out into the market quite early on, and make all contractors and suppliers aware of services that we're going to be coming up and offering. That's something we definitely want to be looking at in the future, being more proactive and more future planning. And then that will give the larger contractors, particularly those coming into the area who aren't familiar with the area, to actually start engaging with those local suppliers. But obviously, by the time a contractor's actually bid, they've obviously made their bid up with their funding, so it may be too late for them to say, well, actually, you can't use the suppliers that you've thought about. So I think it's that early engagement that we need to be. What we've done as well as part of the engagement is we've got some reps from the various directorates from in the service areas who are really knowledgeable in those particular areas. For example, I've had an initial conversation with Mark Brown about, when he does big sort of contracting and construction type works and looking at the bigger suppliers, encouraging to come into into our local area, and that's when we can encourage them to start engaging with those that supply chain that we've got. So I think it's trying to front end it and actually get that engagement out there at the beginning.
Great, thanks very much for that answer. Councillor McCartney-Gray.
Thank you, Chair. I think my question's been answered. I was going to ask about 3.3, about the priorities, working locally, ethically and sustainably, and where we had one company that perhaps we had a history with, but the contract was too big for them. Would we look to encourage them to look locally and put together a joint bid with other companies that we may know of? Are we allowed to do that?
So what I think Tracy articulated quite well is actually the importance of the commissioning side, because you need to really understand your marketplace. You need to understand what options you have out there to deliver the service you're looking for. And sometimes it's actually about creating that environment where you can have someone external to yourselves able to deliver that, and that is something that is very possible for us to do, and something that is very worthwhile to do, because I've done quite a lot of work of it in relation to social care provision, when actually we're struggling to find the number of places for residents. And fundamentally, when you actually got the local business community together, whether it be private small firms who are doing care provision, or whether it's the big players in the market, and they come together, you can actually have a very different conversation. So you can do that. What you can't do is obviously say we'll only let this contract if 3 of you work together. So it's about mobilising the market, and as Tracy says, making sure people understand what services we will be commissioning when, and then obviously bringing some people to the table and talking and having interactive conversations.
If I could just add just a very minor point on that. I mean, one thing that we do have within our remit is actually looking at how we package up our contracts, and we've certainly done that. For example, I think on the Let NCC, where we need various tradespeople to maintain some properties. Initially, a few years ago, we went out as one big package, and by default, how we package that, there was no local suppliers who could bid because they couldn't meet all of those trades. So then when we let again, we've broken it down, and so then we can. So I think we need to be smarter about how we package up the contracts, and that can, because by default we could be packaging in such a way that we are knocking out the local smaller suppliers. So yeah, we can look at certainly how we do that as well.
Thank you for that. I've got Councillor Ryan next, then Councillor Sands, then Councillor Samesi. So Councillor Ryan, please.
Thank you, Chair. We are a year into the COVID pandemic, and that has drastically changed the way we work and operate as a society, and also how local authorities operate. Norwich City Council, like most other councils, have taken on different responsibilities and different duties. To what extent has the pandemic had an effect on the way our procurement operation has been carried out? To what extent has it caused us problems? Annabelle, would you be happy to answer that one?
So I don't believe our existing procurement strategy has been a barrier at all. The reality is we were given certain exemptions to be able to manage whether we needed to do swift procurement and deal with the current environments we were in, but we haven't actually seen an impact. As you know, we've managed to contract and put in place a development of a brand new depot for the transition of our new wholly owned company. So actually the pandemic to us in that respect hasn't really hit us from a procurement perspective, and it's been managed very, very well, with a very successful outcome, with the keys being handed over today, I believe. So, and that was one of our biggest risks during the pandemic, that we wouldn't be able to deliver that. So from where I'm sat today, I can't speak for all services, but I haven't heard of anything that's particularly through the strategy been a barrier to us actually managing that situation.
So we've been fleet of foot to deal with whatever's come our way in the last year or so when it comes to...
Yeah, we have been very, very responsive to what we've needed to deliver, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you for that question. Councillor Sands, please.
Thank you, Chair. My question relates back to some things within council, go back to before I was even a councillor, carried over after I started. We used to have a contract with an IT provider not the current one, I might add, because this goes back a long time. This ended up coming before scrutiny when I was first a councillor. And one of the things we were told is that when contracts are let, the contract provider, the new what-to-do company, whoever it might be, very, very enthusiastic in the first stage of their contract and provides excellent service. And then in the middle stage of their contract, they provide simply good, solid service. But in the third stage of their contract, they start to become a bit lackadaisical, and the service they provide becomes very patchy to sometimes out and out bad, as it did in this instance, partly because they are taking things for granted, and also partly because whoever in that company who looks for contracts is now looking around for new contracts elsewhere. How can we monitor and ensure that any contract providers provide an even state of service and don't reach this lackadaisical, don't care approach in the final part or the final years of their contract?
So fundamentally what we're talking there is about the contract management side. That's not actually something that you can influence through the procurement strategy, but what you do when you commission services is put questions to every organisation to ask them about how they will ensure that the delivery of the contract is for the life of the contract we're letting. And then if the performance does change within that period, that's around contract management and dealing with it at that stage. But unless I've misunderstood Councillor Sands, I'm not quite sure how that relates to the procurement strategy in front of us. I apologise if I've misunderstood your question.
Because it sort of comes in the procurement stage, doesn't it? In ensuring, through, as you said, through questioning, that the company is going to provide good service for the life of their contract.
I think also, if I might jump in, Chair, I suppose going back to Annabelle's point, it's also about Councillor Sands having the correct mechanisms in place to monitor those contracts within the services. So you're absolutely right. When we let a contract, it's a very kind of thorough and rigorous process, but it's also making sure that the services who are effectively monitoring that contract through its life are keeping the company on its toes, and that we're doing the things also that we're expected to do. So we're working quite closely with them to make sure both sides are getting out of it what they need in order to keep performance high throughout the length of the contract.
If I could just come in there as well, under the reducing commercial risk element of the strategy, we have, where we've identified that we need to make sure that we've got appropriately trained contract managers, and I think that's sort of, Annabelle mentioned that earlier. So, we have met, obviously we've realised that, we need to make sure we've got contract managers identified, that they're trained, they've got the skills and the capacity, and that, they proactively manage their relationships, and say that we have actually got that identified in the strategy. So hopefully that will pick that up. Contract management is a very important part of the process.
Thanks very much for that. Councillor Samesi, your question, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going in a slightly different direction, if that's okay with people. Page 50, 333, we're talking about working locally, ethically, sustainably. And the first bullet point, encourage all new procurement activities to consider sustainability criteria, the use of green energy, offset of carbon emissions, apprenticeships, and the use of SMEs. And I was interested in the apprenticeships bit of that. Just want to, us to be thinking about, given that it seems to be about philosophy as much as targets and, sticks and carrots type mentality. It feels to me as though this is something a bit more kind of got a bit more texture to it, if that makes sense. And I just want to say that, we know that the pandemic has, evidence suggests, disproportionately affected young people. Can we think about those apprenticeships and as where we can have those, and making sure that we follow through on that, and it's not just a word that's in the policy that did you see what I'm saying? So I'm just thinking about that aspect of it. I think young people really do need to realise that we're thinking of them and trying to support them as well. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think it's very important when we do actually go out to the market, and we've actually very clear in our specification that we keep reiterating those questions, and we do actually ask how many apprenticeships do they have, are they looking to bring on board new apprenticeships, and then that forms part of our evaluation as to where that organisation fits with our, strategy and understanding, because apprenticeships are very, very important to us, and we want to ensure that we are engaging with that type of employment, and we're looking at that at the council ourselves internally, as well as obviously working with our business partners through the procurement strategy.
Great. Thank you for that. I've got Councillor Osborne and then Councillor Graham, please.
Yes, thank you. Just coming, we've talked a bit about minimum standards, coming at that sort of from a slightly different point of view, which is about the specifications that we write for when putting contracts out for tender. I'm looking at this is about carbon reduction again. Looking at the Committee on Climate Change's 6th Carbon Budget Report, they say for local authorities, they say quite clearly that procurement is one of the major things that councils can do one of the major areas which they can control to reduce carbon emissions, and they say explicitly recommend that councils should set pathways for carbon reduction in specifications for contracts. So is that something that we're looking to do?
That will be all part of the implementation of the strategy, because we're clearly identifying that is a important element of how we procure, and therefore we will do any support and training and guidance around how actually we do put that within the specification. So that will be part of the implementation. Councillor Osborne. Tracy, did you want to add?
Yeah, just to say, obviously, as we've tried to sort of, this is not just the procurement team, this is the whole council that is the strategies for, and actually it's the service areas themselves who commission these services. They're the experts in the goods and services that they know, so they come with a wealth of knowledge about their area. So we'll be working, obviously it's a big procurement team working with the service areas to work through this, and obviously if Richard Wilson, the environmental manager, sort of working through that as well. But yeah, so the specifications is usually driven by the service areas with their requirements, but obviously we can assist in that and look at how we then evaluate based on that specification. But yeah.
I think that's again a potentially a recommendation, Chair. If it's not already being sort of included. Can I just ask one other question about specifications, which is about councillor site of specifications, and I can think of a case with the specifications for some of the estates maintenance or estates programs, where leaseholders in my ward have been quite unhappy with the specifications for security doors, for example. And I'm wondering, I don't believe that we normally see councillors normally see the specifications when those contracts are being written. Is that as a result, is that sort of below the line confidential, or is there an opportunity for, if we want to see the specifications for specific contracts, that we can request to see that ahead of it going out to tender, because by the time it's gone to tender, then it's too late in a way.
So that's part of our operational implementation of the strategies which members approve. So we'll talk to you about the principles of what we're looking to commission, whether it be a new housing development, but the actual implementation and the detailed work around the specification is dealt with at officer level, and we don't currently have any engagement from members at that point.
Thank you for that. Councillor Graham, please.
Thank you. I'm hearing that there's no one size fits all, and that we don't want to put barriers up to local businesses, and I have every sympathy with those views, but we do need some sizes for some things, and they may be different. I am quite concerned about the lack of minimum standards, especially, and I think we can maybe get around that by pathways, by direction of travel, but we still have to have some kind of smart goal to ensure that people who can't meet the standards you know, we can have a standard that we want to achieve, even if we're not going to achieve it now. Otherwise, how are we going to set people in the right direction? You know, SMART goals need to be measurable, so we need to measure stuff. Otherwise, it's just going to be a nice philosophy. It might not be, but there is that risk.
I know it probably seems quite theoretical, but for example, though, it may be if we're looking to procure a new fleet that we can put a specific minimum standard on that fleet. If, for example, we were going out for a refuse contract, though, we could be very specific within there about the percentage of the fleet that we would expect. If, though, we're just looking at, I don't know, I'm going to be completely extreme, a one-person courier service, we probably wouldn't want to be that specific around whether we'd need them to have an electric vehicle or not. Or if we did, then we just need to be mindful of what that may do to the response that we get and who may respond. So it's just being mindful of the project that you're looking at, what you're trying to procure, and therefore what level you want to go through to with those minimum standards. But what we also need to be mindful of as well, it's a journey, it's a transition. We have to basically bring our services in that they are efficient and cost effective, and the cost associated with some of those minimum standards we might need to be mindful of. So there are different ways of doing it. You can basically tender something of, actually, if we say we want you to quote on the basis of a minimum standard of this, what would your response be? And then we have a separate element where we say, now give us the same service offer with a different standard, and then we can compare the two. But I haven't worked closely enough at Norwich yet to know whether we've looked at doing stuff like that, but it is something we can do, and then it gives you the two comparators. So there's lots of options. Sorry, I know it's difficult. There's no one answer to some of this, and it very much depends on what we're procuring. But I think the strategy is trying to take us on the principles, and then what the next job for us to be will be about working with the organisation about how do these principles therefore work, and what does that mean to you on the procurements that are coming up. And that will be a very important part of what we do next, is making sure this document isn't just put on the shelf. It becomes something that we live and breathe, and those principles do then get embedded within the organisation, and you will then start to see it coming through on the third-party contracts that we commission.
Is that what you meant about making it mainstream? So like having a set of values rather than standards, and making those values mainstream in every decision. Otherwise, I was a bit puzzled about the mainstreaming.
Yeah, no, they're very much so. The strategy is putting the principles in place by which we will work and we will commission our third-party contracts. So that is, you know, what we're doing with the strategy. We're deciding what the principles that are important to us. It may be that one organisation won't have local business or local, you know, economy as part of what they want to put in their strategy, and you just won't see it. But for us, it's something that we've identified as being very important, and we therefore want to incorporate it. So what we're trying to do within the strategy is decide what those principles are that are really important to us. And basically the question to us here tonight is, do you feel we've got the key issues covered, and is there anything else that you feel we need to be considering? And there is lots of discussion, and I appreciate that, around the next steps and implementation. I'll be very happy to come and talk to you again about how we're approaching that and what we're doing, but it's getting the principles tonight, and whether we've really got the strategy in a place where you feel it's covered what we want to do as an organisation. Can
I just come in as well? And I think just to sort of reflect that some of the question, Leslie, about the direction of travel and the measurability of that sits in the policy area specifically. And this document, this strategy, sits in that wider context of the areas of corporate policy. This is, in a sense, is saying this is our approach to how procurement can help deliver what the organisation needs. And so, for example, obviously within the corporate performance framework, we have measures which are about, for example, the carbon impact and reducing the carbon impact of the whole council, including our supply chain. We have our environmental strategy, which sets out what our ambition is in that policy area. So in a sense, this document is one of the mechanisms by which we deliver the ambitions within those policy areas. And the measurement of those doesn't need to sit in this document. What this document needs to do is enable our services to be able to meet the policy ambitions using procurement. So you wouldn't want to put all of the specific measurements within this document, but they have to be understood, or this document has to be understood in the context of those wider policy ambitions.
Thank you. Can I just throw accessibility into the mix as well? Because I think it's missing. I'm sorry if it's just me that's missed it.
Thank you. Councillor Ryan, I think is next, please.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just picking up on a point which was made earlier on about councillor involvement in contracts. I think although we're throwing a lot in the pot here, lots of ideas about how we go forward, and yes, we do need to set parameters about what we do for procurement, but I think it would be very unwise to get councillors sitting on and looking at individual contracts for, say, windows in their ward, because A, it would take a lot of time to get the job done, and B, this is something that the officers should be deciding on and setting the agenda on once there is a framework in place. So can I suggest to the officers that we do not go too far down this direction when it comes to coming up with ideas for this, that we do allow the officers to get on with their jobs once we put a framework in place? Is that something that we're looking to do? Can I be reassured on that?
Can anyone reassure Councillor Ryan?
Reassure me this. What I'm trying to say is that we won't have councillors sitting in on every contract in their ward, and if they don't like it, they get a say on it.
Fundamentally, that's not the structure we in place currently, and I thought I'd try to say that, so I apologise if I wasn't clear.
No
but
problem.
Fundamentally, we approve the strategy and the direction of travel from a member level, and then officers do the implementation. We don't have councillor engagement and actually doing specifications for particular contracts.
That's very kind of you. I just wanted to be reassured in that area. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have any more questions from members before we get into a discussion as to what any recommendations might look like? So specifically questions still at the moment. Questions, Councillor Osborne.
Can I just come back on that point that I wasn't suggesting that councillors should have a sight of every contract. That wasn't what I was intending. I suppose what I was trying to say is that there have been contracts where residents in my ward have repeatedly raised concerns about the specifications of the contract, and when those contracts are up for renewal, I suppose my question is, how can councillors have input? Or it may just be a case of talking to the service area, which we do anyway, but I was just wondering if there's any other sort of means of doing that. And because the specification, so far as I can see, is the key point of those contracts that sets the parameters of how that contract then works, that residents have concerns about. Yes, I'm not suggesting that we want to have sight of every contract. It's just some particular contracts where there have been concerns raised. We will want to come to service areas and say, these are the concerns.
So as we do currently, Councillor Osborne, we'll obviously work with you and take the feedback in relation to any particular issues that members of the public have been having. And all of those data sets are part of how we go forward, because the last thing we want to be doing is to be putting in place infrastructure that's not fit for purpose, because it would just cost us more money. So we do value that feedback, and we do listen, and then it does feed through into the next stages. But you do obviously have the very big opportunity when we're looking at the budget to look at our investment and making sure that the understanding is there in relation to what the projects are and what the outcomes are meant to be, and ensuring that we get it very clear at that stage. And therefore it's then our responsibility of officers to make sure we deliver against that. Thank you.
Any members who will now move over to discussion with a view to getting to some recommendations? Anyone have anything they'd like to say, not in question form at this stage, please, from a discussion point of view? Thank you, Councillor Osborne, for sending me a couple of suggested recommendations that we might have. I don't know if you want to start and highlight those to the rest of the committee so we can have a discussion about those. Thank you.
Yes, so the first one, which is the one I just sent you actually, James. I appreciate what's been said about, we don't necessarily want to set a minimum standard, but to be honest, if we can set a minimum standard for a living wage, then I think we have to be able to set a minimum standard for expected zero carbon emissions. We're aiming to be net zero as a council by 2030. How else are we going to achieve that? It's applying the same principle from the living wage, which I think is a very good thing. So that's one recommendation, to set that minimum standard. The second recommendation, which would be to have a 20% social value weighting in the procurement assessment criteria. Again, this is something that Bristol has. I think Manchester have it as well, Brighton and Hove, Stroud, I think. And again, it's recommended in the Committee on Climate Change's report, but obviously it doesn't just apply to climate change, it also applies to other social value. And if we're looking to get as much out of the contract as we can in terms of other benefits, not just financial benefits to the council, then that's got to be as high as we can make it, so far as I'm concerned. And then the third recommendation is again looking at zero carbon, but from the specification point of view, as much as as well as the minimum standards, which is that in all specifications, making sure that pathways to net zero are built into those specifications.
Thank you very much for those three potential recommendations. Does any other member wish to comment on those? Councillor Sands, please.
Thank you, Chair. Again, it goes back to the question I had, which related to contract management. We now have a new pay policy, part of which provides an excellent career progression for officers employed by council. I would hope that provides avenues for them to improve their experience and skills and everything they require to the job. And I'd like to make sure that is applied to our officers who will be responsible for contract management, and also ensure that that process I outlined of making sure that for the life of the contract, standards of service provision are maintained. I don't know how that can be worded or how it can be put into recommendations, but I think it's an important aspect of the whole thing.
Thank you, Councillor Sands. So, in essence, you're sort of looking for a recommendation that would ensure that standards are maintained for the life of the contract. Is that a succinct way of putting that?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. Councillor Ryan, you'd indicated as well.
Well, thank you, Chair. Councillor Osborne, exactly what do you mean by 20% social value weighting, and how would it work in a practical way?
And I'm sure Tracy can probably answer better than me. Yeah, I'll hand over to Tracy because I don't want to explain it wrong, but yeah.
I'd like to know what I'm voting for, that's all.
Well, just in general, when we go out to contract, at the moment we have a split. Say there's 100 marks that you can give. We may give 60% of the marks based on price, 40% on quality. I think what Councillor Osborne is suggesting, we'd have like, I know, 60% on price, and we've only got 40% left. So if 20% went to social value indicators, then you've then got 20% on sort of the quality of the specification instruction. So what you're doing, you're weighting their responses. So basically you'd be asking questions. Some of the questions will be on, delivery of the service that we want. If we've got kitchens and bathrooms, can they deliver this to the required standards? But you'd then be asking very specific questions about the social value aspect, and you'd have to, make sure that you could measure those responses. And that's the very, important thing when you ask questions. You need to make sure that when you get all the responses back from all the various suppliers, that you actually can very logically and actually sort of, and in fact add a number to actually the responses. But that's I think what Councillor Osborne is meaning, that we'd actually set, say, 20% of the 100 marks would be purely on questions that we would ask around social value and what they can be delivering through the contract.
I just wondered how you would measure social value there. I mean, it must differ hugely, mustn't it, from job to job?
As I think Adam has indicated, you know, we do need to look at actually how we can measure social value. And it's actually, and as I said, you know, there's two aspects. It's actually when we ask a question, how can a supplier, or how can all suppliers answer that question the same and fairly, so it's equal? Yeah. So we're actually, you know, judging all of this, all of the bids on this at the same level, on how we can measure it. So that's one aspect. And then when we do let the contract, if we built those things in, again, it's that measurement and feedback and reporting, so we actually know that they actually can meet what they're saying they're meeting. But yeah, you are correct. It is quite difficult, and all contracts will be different about what measures you want to put in place as far as the social value is concerned.
And I promise my last question, there is hard evidence this is working with other local authorities, is there? These using these measures?
Well, so for example, yeah, some of the frameworks that are used for measuring social value have been used by other local authorities. And you know, the oft-cited example would be Preston, who have, because their ambition was to generate local economic activity, they've used the way that they manage their supply chain to achieve that. So they've got measurable response, and saying being able to point to how much they've generated, or how much their supply chain now stays in the local area, and some of the ancillary benefits and things like apprenticeship. So it's absolutely possible. But as you rightly say, the challenge is having the right measurement that relates to what your overall outcomes you're trying to achieve are, and that you can measure those in a way that mean that you are achieving what you set out to achieve.
Because I don't want to tie your hands as officers, because you will go into some projects where you perhaps will not want the same percentage you want from others, because you haven't got the money to spend, or there's other reasons for doing it. So I want you to have this, to some extent, the same amount of flexibility you have at the moment to do deals, to use a better word. Yeah. But thank you.
Can I come in?
I've got Councillor Fulton McAllister, then Councillor McCartney-Gray, then Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Chair. So I instinctively support the principle of this, and I think that it should be something that we certainly pay more attention to. However, I don't want to essentially agree something which will create a problem for our service delivery going forward. So I'd like to suggest that we have the recommendation ever so slightly tweaked, and rather than deciding what level the social value points are at, whether it's 20% or whatever, I think that we should actually be asking Cabinet to explore introducing social value as something which is considered when contracts are issued, and that way we sort of give we are more likely to get Cabinet to agree with our recommendation, because it's something that I'm sure they do consider and would like to actively be acknowledged as considering. But it's going to mean that we could start, if it's prohibitive at 20%, we could start at the lower level and move our way up. But something like that would be more likely to get agreement, I would hope.
Thank you. Councillor McCartney-Gray next, please, then Councillor Osborne, then Councillor Graham, then Councillor Summers. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I was actually going to suggest tweaking as well. Councillor Fulton McAllister, I was going to suggest that we look at, where possible, and we should explore social value weighting when we are looking to go out to tender.
Happy with Councillor McCartney-Gray's tweak rather than mine.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Councillor Osborne, please.
Yes, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tracy, but we do already consider social value. So that would basically be already recommending what we're already doing. The just coming back on the, how do we measure this? Again, correct me if I'm wrong, Tracy, but the way I've heard it described is it's almost like, when you have those job interviews, or when you do job interviews where, there's a certain number of questions set on things and people are scored according to their answers. And so, it's not necessarily tying officers' hands. It's saying, this is what we think is important in the contracts that we procure. And I don't think it's tying officers' hands any more than having a higher weighting for price is actually tying officers' hands into getting the cheapest contract or the best value for money. And we need to be looking at what we want as a council, and what we want as a council is not just to have the cheapest contract or the most sort of to be absolutely a commercial enterprise. We want to be delivering what's best for the residents and people of Norwich, and that's done through social value. And other councils can do it. Why can't we?
Thank you, Councillor Osborne. Councillor Graham, please.
Thank you. I wonder if a reasonable compromise might be consider to consider a 20% or a maximum social value rating. If we're not going to be able to add it, but I would prefer to add it. I also want to throw in something about biodiversity, and it might be something like a presumption in favour of certain things. So where it's relevant, hedges instead of fences, soft surfaces. I don't want to go into so much detail as to be irrelevant, but yeah, taken into account, and with presumptions in favour of more rather than less, or something like that.
But I presume that biodiversity would be included under social value, I presume.
We would, but I think it needs to be spelled out.
As this is a new sort of recommendation, can I get an officer steer from whether biodiversity would already be taken into account, or whether that does need to be explicitly, or it would benefit from being explicitly referenced?
I suppose. Oh, sorry, yeah, go on.
No, go on, Adam. Sorry.
Well, I was going to say that in terms of the specifying of what we mean by social value, that doesn't sit in the procurement strategy. So, so that would be part of the implementation. So part of the implementation roadmap is so we have a social value framework now. So as part of the implementation, the development of that social framework to reflect what the priorities are for the council, and ensuring that we can measure those. So whether that's biodiversity, whether that's zero carbon, whether that's apprenticeships, it all sits within that social value framework, which isn't itself part of the procurement strategy. So I suppose if you were making a recommendation to Cabinet about this, it would be a recommendation for them that was considered in the implementation phase, but it wouldn't be to consider it being specified in the strategy.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for the clarification there. So consider that in the implementation phase. Thank you. Councillor Sarmezi, I think you were next, please.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, like everybody, I think here, sympathy for this social value and how significant and important it is. I think it would be difficult to have a sort of universal thing for every single contract to kind of meet this kind of social value 20% weighting. But I wonder if when we come to the implementation stage and when we're considering the awarding of contracts, can we record somewhere why it isn't possible for a company to consider taking on apprentices, or why a company can't consider whatever it is that's the fine-grained kind of criteria for social value, so that it kind of becomes part of the kind of weighing up. You know, there can be very good reasons perhaps why these things can't happen for some contracts. So not just about what you can do, but why you can't. But that's all part of this implementation measures that you've been talking about, Adam. So that was just my thoughts on it. It's sometimes these things can be very sort of become very numerical, and sometimes there is a narrative to something as well. That's all I'm trying to say. Makes it more difficult, even more difficult to measure, I'm afraid, but I do think that's the case.
Thank you for that. I think it's a really interesting point, actually, because actually if we're recording why companies can't do a particular thing, then actually it might help us as a council work with the local business community to identify those barriers and help them overcome them for future contracts. I think that's really interesting. Councillor Osborne.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. That's a good point. If it's possible from an officer's point of view, just picking up again on the social value and the numerical sort of aspect of it. My understanding is that it's not that the contractors have to deliver 20% social value, because what does that mean? It's exactly. When you're going out to contract and doing the assessment. So it's like an interview. This is what you're selecting the contractor on the basis of. So it's a weighting of what we think is important when we select those contractors. And then obviously the specifications and so on is where we can work with contractors to make sure that that's delivered on, which is a separate thing.
Thank you. Councillor Sands.
No, thank you, Chair. In point 5 there, would it sound better to have to record whether or why not a company is able to offer apprenticeships? And in item 4, would it read better if it says ensure standards of service are maintained for the life of the contract? Because I know our officers will maintain their standards, but yeah.
Great, thank you for that. Councillor Samesi.
Sorry, on point 5, I use apprenticeships as an example, but I mean you could say that about all of the social value elements. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you. Any other members have any comments at this stage, please, with regard to what's on the screen? Do people feel that that's something that we could put forward as recommendations to Cabinet to consider at its April meeting? Councillor Osborne, if you want to.
Yeah, I'm not going to sort of necessarily argue against it, but point 4, ensure standards of service are maintained for the life of the contract. I would expect that should be sort of self-evident in what officers are trying to do.
Jane, Councillor Osborne's right on that. I agree with him. It's something they should do anyway. It's stating the obvious, to put it bluntly.
I think obviously Councillor Sands, for those of us who are have been around here longer than perhaps we care to remember, and remember the IT contract that he was referring to, it probably becomes has a greater degree of importance than perhaps some of the more recent contracts. But I don't know, Councillor Sands, are you wedded to that staying in there, getting a sense that perhaps others feel it's not as high priority as perhaps
I think it's a very, very important element because it relates to the contract management strategy. And otherwise, I don't want to name this IT company, but it's not the current one. But their level of service became not merely bad, but appalling. And that relates back to 2 things, contract management and also the willingness of the company to meet its obligations for the life of the contract. So I think that's a very, very important element.
Yeah, I'm happy to drop that. It can go through. Okay, it's not.
If I
not
Councillor Osborne.
Yeah, if I can come in, I suppose, you know, I absolutely agree that standards are really important, especially in, you know, some of the standards that we've seen recently. And one of the reasons why we're bringing services back in house is the standards just haven't been good enough. But I don't see that that's necessarily for the procurement strategy. I suppose it's more about you know, and I don't see that recommendation. You know, the recommendation in a way is self-evident. I suppose what a way of making it into a recommendation that would actually deliver that, and that is about, you know, the governance and making sure that we have the governance in place to ensure that standards are continue to be maintained. And I know that Annabelle is already working on that, and, you know, that's something that's being taken forward through the audit committee. So you know, it's something to take forward through audit, maybe not necessarily through scrutiny. But, you know, I don't disagree with it. You know, I think it's an important thing. So I won't fight it.
The title of the discussion paper is Draft Procurement and Contract Management Strategy. So it says it there. So unless we include that in explicitly, then I would be amazingly disappointed, given my previous experience of contracting counsel.
I think we had some agreement there anyway, Councillor Sands. Councillor Graham, you have a point, please.
I have some sympathy with that. I wonder if we might include something about looking at a company's track record in maintaining standards throughout a contract. I'm all for stating the obvious, because what's obvious to me is different to what's obvious to somebody else, and for that reason I'd like to keep 5 and maybe add something about track record. And I'd also like to keep biodiversity and social value, because it's not obvious to everybody that social value covers environmental stuff.
Thank you. I think we're hopefully arriving at a consensus. Is everyone happy with what is on the screen there? Councillor Fulton McAllister, you wish to add something in rather than be happy?
Thanks for that, Chair. So I just wanted to add the words net into into number 1 and number 3, because there will be some contracts which cannot be themselves carbon neutral,
exactly.
and we will have to offset against them.
Yeah.
Basically net zero in essence, yes? Yeah, net zero. Okay, so if those zeros are netted, are we happy to put those recommendations forward to Cabinet for their April meeting? Councillor Graham, are you indicating happiness, or you wish to say something?
I want to say something about net, because net zero is not zero, and you can do nice little things that reduce that reduce your carbon emissions, but if they don't reduce them on a scale that outweighs the emissions that are ongoing, then it's not very helpful. And offsetting is very, very controversial, and if we and doesn't actually reduce emissions. So I would prefer not to have offsetting as part of the mix at all, but if we have to have it, I think it's really important that we have gold standard offsetting, because there are so many scams and so much greenwash around it, that I'd be very reluctant to accept it as a significant plank of our intentions.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I suppose we don't, without going into any sort of specific detail in these recommendations, we're not saying whether it's greenwash or gold standard. So, I mean, although you've raised your points there on the how it would be more desirable to not have net carbon, I think there is a broad consensus that the net zero carbon is comfortable as far as the committee's concerned moving forward today. So on that basis, can I take agreement that we'll put those forward as the recommendations to Cabinet, please? All those in favour? Anyone against? I think that's carried. Thank you. I'd like to thank everyone for contributions today, and I'd also particularly like to thank Councillor Ryan, who has been the Vice Chair and is leaving us today. This is his last meeting, and also Councillor Salmezi, who's been in her relatively short time on the council, has offered some extremely insightful comments and input into this committee. So thank you both for your time and your service, and I look forward to seeing everyone when we come back the other side of the elections. So thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you.